Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 All right, so you can start reading from text 1, 2 in chapter 13.
Okay, chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Text 1 and 2. Arjuna said, "O my dear Krishna, I wish to know about the Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field, and the knower of the field, and of knowledge, and the object of knowledge." The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field." Text 3. O Sion of Bharata, you should understand that I am also the knower of all bodies, and to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Text 4. Now please hear my brief description of this field of activity. And how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the field of activity is, and what its influence and what his influences are. Text 5.
You can hold that. This is introducing the subject matter. All right. So you wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field, and the knower of the field, and of knowledge, and the object of knowledge. So Krishna is giving answers here, right now. Okay, so the Supreme Personality of God said, this body, O son of Kunti, is called the field. And one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. So these are the first two questions he answered, the knower of the field and the field. So we are working in the field of the body. And then the one who knows the body is called the knower of the field. But most people don't know the body, they just live in the body. So then he asks us, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies. So even though there is a knower in each body, he is also the knower in all bodies, and that's super soul. And to understand this body is called knowledge. So this is what knowledge is. Knowledge, all right, that's my opinion. Now he says, now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it is constituted, what the changes are, whence it is produced, and who that knower of the field of activities is, and what its influences are. So we're going to get some answers here in this. So text 5 is, that knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in the Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Text 6-7, the 5 great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms and convictions, all these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interaction. So here in 5 and 6, 7, we are getting understanding of the field of activities and interaction. And here we get the makeup of the field of activities. So it is the 5 great elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then false ego, intelligence, and then the unmanifested. And the 10 senses and the mind, so it's 5 senses, but the working senses and the senses of acquiring knowledge. So that makes it 10, and then the mind. And the 5 sense objects, and then also desire, hatred, happiness, distress, and the aggregate, the life symptoms and convictions. All of this is considered, in summary, to be the field of activity. So the body acts in all these situations. The body is working in this situation at all times. But the spirit soul, the living entity, is above that. He's higher than that, and he's not motivated by that kind of activity. However, if one is covered by the modes of material nature, then one is surely motivated by such activity. Alright, so you can read text 8 through 12. And so far it's only the two of us. Raghunandan just came back from Iran. I don't know if he's going to come in this week.
6, 8 to 12. Humility, prayerlessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of evil of birth, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasure and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and a philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever they may be is ignorance.
Alright, so let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at the breakdown on that. And let's see here. So it's 4 verses taken together. Amanitvam, Adambitvam, Ahimsa Shantir Arjavam, Acharyopasanam Saucham, Shtaryam Atma, Vinigraha. And here it is described, the process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. So this is the process of knowledge. This is the reason for the process of knowledge, to get out of the entanglement of the 24 elements as described before. So the embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of the 24 elements. And the process of knowledge as described here is a means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mai Chanaga Yogena Bhakti Avyabhi Charini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes the devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop with him. So all the good qualities are not developed in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. So basically all of this knowledge that is mentioned here culminates in devotional service. So we can see here and here they're saying this is a continuation of Krishna's explanation of knowledge. But he has already defined knowledge as knowing the field and the two knowers of the field. But these verses describe the process of obtaining jnana. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, of the 20 items mentioned, 17 apply to both the jnani and the bhakta. The last two, accepting the importance of self-realization, which is called Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam, and philosophical search for the absolute truth, Tattva Jnana Artha Darshanam, are technically only for the jnani. Constant and unalloyed devotion to me is the sole quality specifically for the devotee. All the other qualities come to a devotee who exclusively endeavors for constant unalloyed devotion. And these 22 items include qualities such as cleanliness, which if developed are favorable for spiritual advancement, and elements of the process of advancement such as approaching a bona fide spiritual master, perceiving the evils of birth, death, disease, and old age. Integrated as a process, these items are a means for acquiring transcendental knowledge or an accurate understanding of the body, the soul, and the super soul. Therefore, taken as a process that carries one to transcendence, these 20 items have nothing to do with the field of its activity and its interaction. Prabhupada explains this relationship between the process of knowledge and the field of activities. The process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement. So this verse here, these four verses, 8 through 12, giving the methods of knowledge. Right? He says, all of these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So it starts with humility. Humility is the most important thing because it's mentioned first. Pridelessness is the same as humility. And then there's non-violence, tolerance. So to be non-violent also means to tolerate other personalities. And then simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master. Cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, this absence of false ego, which means that we do not think we are this body and we belong to this world, or things in this world belong to us. We understand that Krishna is the actual proprietor and our purpose is to serve him. And then it's a perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So this is considered to be an evil situation: birth, death, old age, and disease. So basically, like he's saying here, this is a means to get out of the bondage of the material nature or the field of activity. All right. So
I have a question, Paul.
Go ahead.
In the purport, sorry, in the translation, it says detachment from the general mass of people.
Right. And the reason for that is because the general mass of people are actually materialists, and we do not associate with them. We can detach ourselves from them. However, we do interact with them for preaching this method of Krishna consciousness or giving them some engagement. Because like earlier in Bhagavad Gita it says, Na buddhi bhiran janayat joshayat sarva karmani. That is, so as not to disturb the minds of those who are attached to fruitive activities, one should not induce them to stop work, but rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, one should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual elevation to Krishna consciousness. So, that's the reason for the detachment. We associate with the general mass of people, like on our jobs, on a regular basis, going to the grocery store, doing all things that we normally do to maintain ourselves and our family. But it doesn't mean that we become one of them. It doesn't mean that we join them and have the same ideas and concepts as they. So this is basically what that detachment means. What do you think about that?
That's fine, but unless you're living in Vrindavan, India, something like that, place of pilgrimage, detachment from the general masses is going to be hard, because if you gotta take the bus, if you gotta go to the supermarket, you still have to do some sort of interaction with these people.
Yeah. You have to do some interaction, but you have to keep it at a regular level. You don't become one of them, a member of their ideas and following. So it's like, we say hi, Hare Krishna to everyone. We give them prasad. We talk to them nicely. They ask us questions. We give them answers. If they need help, we go ahead and help them in certain situations. All right. But it doesn't mean that we are buddies in the sense that we are doing the same thing. We are not doing the same thing. We are practicing devotional service. So we have to associate with people, because we are here in this material world, and we are not the only beings in the material world. So there are other people who are here, and some of them actually help us in our daily lives. So we have to respect that also. So basically, the detachment means not to be induced by their idea of what life is and what's the purpose of the human form of life. That's basically what it is. It's nothing, like we have to stay away from them, and we don't have to associate with them at all. We do have to associate with them. So normally I see people maybe in the supermarket or going to one of the stores, and they're doing something, and I make a comment on it, and they smile, and they. So I don't think that by doing that I'm following their ideas and their moods and their real understanding of life. So does that make a little more sense?
Yeah, sorry, it was muted.
All right. Okay. All right. So we can move on to 13. So you can read 13.
Text 13. I shall now explain the noble, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahma, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. 14. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, head, and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. Text 15. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living entities, all living beings. He transcends the mode of nature, and at the same time he is the master of all the modes of material nature. Text 16. The Supreme Truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Text 17. Although the super soul appears to be divided among all the beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. 18. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. 19. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and the noble have been similarly described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain my nature.
All right. So, verses 13 through 19. And here what is being explained is he's explaining the knowable, all right? That which we have to know. That which is the end of knowledge. That's what we're trying to understand when we're practicing knowledge or jnana yoga. So I shall explain, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Then he says, Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So that Brahman, that spirit, is the knowable. Then everywhere his hands and legs, his eyes, heads, faces, he has ears everywhere. In this way the super soul exists, pervading everything. So super soul is everywhere at the same time. Now he's the original source of all senses, and yet he is without senses. So everything is coming via him, but still he doesn't manifest as a living being like we are. He's unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. So being the maintainer of all living beings, that super soul is the supreme lord that stays with the living entity throughout his sojourn in the material world, no matter how long it takes. And he transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time he is the master of all the modes of material nature. So he controls everything in the material world, but he is not controlled by it. He is the master of everything in this material world. So he's the original source of all senses. Yes, he's without senses. He's unattached, although he's the maintainer of all living entities. He transcends the modes of material nature, and at the same time, he is master of the modes of material nature. So the Supreme Truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. So this is an explanation of the Supersoul. He is existing outside and inside of all living beings. He is existing in the moving and the non-moving also. Then he is subtle beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. So, with the material senses, we cannot perceive the Supersoul. It's only through knowledge that we can actually perceive the Supersoul. And although far, far away, he is also near to us all. So like I say, he maintains that proximity to us by going throughout our material life in the material world. Okay, so although the Supersoul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. So even the soul, the Supersoul, exists in each and every personality and in the non-moving items too. He still is never divided. He is still one. So this is the way the Supreme Lord is able to know everything that's happening all at the same time, because he is present as a Supersoul. And although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and he develops all. So he takes care of the annihilation and the development of material nature and the intelligence and the activities of the persons in the material world. Then he is the source of light in all luminous subjects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge. He is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. So this is the Supersoul, and he is the person. He is the knowable. He is what we have to know. We have to understand the Supersoul, and in that way we can understand the presence of the Supreme Lord in this material world, and at the same time outside of the material world. So we can continue with okay. So thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain my nature. So the field of activities is the body, and that has been explained. Knowledge, which is the ability to come out of the field of activities, and the knowable is Brahman, the spirit or the Supersoul. So this is explained in there. All right. So text 20. So material nature and the living entity should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. The living entity in the material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil among various species. Then he goes on to say, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer, permitter, and is known as the Supersoul. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So we can go to. All right, and here we are seeing that material nature and living entity should be understood to be beginningless. So that means they're actually eternal. If they have no beginning, it means they have no end. And the transformations and the modes of material nature are products of material nature. So whatever happens here, you are using material nature and the living entities in material nature. These are all transformations of the modes of matter, and they are products of material nature. And that means the spirit soul stands aloof from them, but he doesn't understand that. So nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So basically, some people might blame, they might say, well, God is unfair because he gives some people a better situation than others. But that's not the case. The living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So he is the one who is actually causing that. And the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. So he follows in the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature, because of his association with that material nature. And as a result of that, he meets with good and evil among various species, not only among the human being, but in all species. Then he goes on to mention there's another transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer, permitter, and who is known as the Super Soul. So one who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So here Krishna is saying that one who understands this philosophy, he is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again. And so you can see, let's take it 23, 24. So here Krishna begins his explanation of how material nature, which is called Prakriti, and the Purushas combine, referring to the soul in text 20 to 22 and 24, and to the Super Soul in text 23. Their union is described as anadi, or beginningless. Speaking of this combination, Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, although the living entity was originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to his rebellious nature, he is conditioned within material nature. It really does not matter how long these living entities or superior entities of the Supreme Lord have come in contact with material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead knows, however, how and why this actually took place. So, Prabhupada always says, we shouldn't question why we are here, but we should try to utilize the method by where we can get out of it. So here it is said, nature said, now this text again addresses the topic of the doer. The living entity is the cause of all his sufferings and enjoyments because he has illicitly embraced Maya with the desire to predominate and enjoy independently of Krishna. He thus becomes entangled in material nature. And taking his karma into consideration, material nature then creates for him a field meant ultimately for suffering. This all takes place under the sanction of the actual Purusha, the Super Soul. Therefore, although nature is the cause of the entire material manifestation, the living entity causes his own happiness and distress. Krishna explains this point in the next verse, and the next verse is 22. And the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, and this is a famous verse. Purusha Prutishto hi bhukte prakriti jan gunan karanam gunasangosya sarasadyo nijanmasya. So the living entity in material nature follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature, and this is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, as a result of that, he meets with good and evil amongst various species. And here it is said, by his association with material nature, while in an enjoying spirit, karanam guna sangasya, a jiva traps himself in the cycle of repeated birth and death. Sarasadyoni janmashu. Practically, by his attempt, the living entity becomes matter and experiences change, birth, death, old age and disease, although he is changeless. So, he becomes matter. Here it says, he becomes matter and experiences the change, birth, death, old age and disease. So text 23 describes the actual Purusha, which is the super soul. Alright, we saw that. In 24, one who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. And so it is said here, text 24 to 26 describe the understanding of this knowledge. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, clear understanding of material nature, the super soul, and the individual soul by their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material world. So, basically, we can have material happiness in this world, and we can, at the end of life, go back to the spiritual world and not come back here to suffer again. So, let's see here. You could go ahead and read from 25 onwards.
Text 27?
Yeah.
O Chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities.
No, what verse are you reading from?
Sorry?
What verse are you reading from?
I just asked if 27.
No, start at 25.
Some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without furtive desires. 26. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they are transcended to the path of birth and death. 27. O Chief of the Bharatas, you know that whatever you see in existence, both moving and non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Text 28. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that himself by his mind, thus he approaches a transcendental destination. Text 30. One can see one can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees.
Okay. So we from 25 through 30. Okay. Some perceive the super soul within themselves, and they use meditation, which is the Sanga yoga, to perceive the spirit soul. Others through the cultivation of knowledge, and others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. So, meditation is Ashtanga yoga, cultivation of knowledge is Jnana yoga, and working without fruitive desires is Karma yoga. So, these are the ways that one can actually perceive the super soul. Then again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. And because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. And this is the benediction of the devotees in the material world, giving this knowledge to others. And because of their tendency to hear from such authorities, they can transcend the path of birth and death. So, O Chief of the Varasas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. So we know the field of activities is those items of water, fire, ether, mind, intelligence, false, all these things here, the 10 senses, the mind, that's the field of activities. And he says whatever we are seeing in existence, both moving and non-moving, that's only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field of activities. So this is what we see. We see the activities, we see the knower, and he's engaging in all these activities. But one who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, he actually sees. So, now we know what, the moving and non-moving, the field of activities, the know of the feeler. And then we say those who see the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, he understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within this destructible body is ever destroyed. He actually sees. So he understands the eternal nature of the living entity, the eternal nature of the super soul. And one who sees the super soul present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. So when we see the super soul equally present everywhere in every living being, then he does not degrade himself by his mind, thus he approaches the transcendental destination. So by perceiving the super soul, he is actually perceiving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. So basically, this is what's happening here. The self is dragged along with the field of activities, but really and truly, the self doesn't do anything in the material world. He's completely aloof, because he's not of the nature of materialism. So he can't actually be part of that material nature. All right, so any questions or comments there?
The last part is you just referenced to the soul does not do anything because it is not of the material nature.
Yeah, this one is X30, right?
Yeah.
So,
So when the body does something, who initiates the body to make that move? Let's say, using a simple term, if we want to make 2 steps, does the soul initiate that, or the body just initiates that?
well, the initiation is the entanglement of the soul or the attachment of the soul to the material body. But actually, it's like if you take a piece of paper or a piece of like a leaf or so and drop it in a flowing river. It goes down the river. It's not the leaf that's doing it. It's not you who dropped the leaf in the water that's doing it. So what happens is because we're attached to this material world, we are thinking that we're doing it. But in truth and in fact, we are not doing these things. We are just attached to the material nature. And so we think that we are doing it, and then we accept the results, and we accept the sufferings and the happiness that comes with it. So, it's here it is said that the verse further explains the knowledge given in text 21. I, the soul, am the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments, but I do nothing. Only material nature acts, and for the purpose of engendering humility, it is stressed herein that the individual soul does nothing. So basically, the individual soul, just like the super soul, is witnessing everything that's happening. Of course, the individual soul is more attached to what's happening. But the super soul is completely aloof. But basically, if you look at it like this, sometimes you go to work, and at the end of the day, it's 5 o'clock, that's when you finish, or 6 o'clock, whatever time you finish, and you leave. You put down everything that you were doing there, and you emerge a different person. You're not part of that activity that's going on there anymore. And this is what's happening in the material situation. So if we are not attached, then we put down that, and we act as the pure spirit soul. In that case, we are actually doing nothing in this world, because the only activity of the spirit soul is to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the super soul, and by that service he becomes happy. The soul doesn't need anything in the material world. He doesn't need to eat, he doesn't need to sleep, he doesn't need any of those things. But because we're attached to material nature, we think we need all these things. So actually, the material body and the material world is not an illusory situation. What is illusory is the attachment, because it can quite easily be dissolved. Just like at 5 o'clock, you put down everything at work and you leave. You go home. So this is kind of the explanation of that situation. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, Robert.
So then we have only a few minutes left. Let's see if you can finish up to 31 through 35. Okay, you want to go ahead and read the last one?
From 30?
31.
31. In a sense, when man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how these are expanded everywhere, he attains the Brahman conception. Those of the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature, despite contact with the material body. O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. 33. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahman vision does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. 34. O son of Bharata, as the sun alone illuminates all the universe, so does the living entity, one with the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. 35. Those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage, immaterial nature, attain the supreme goal.
Okay. So 31. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, you see how beings are expanded everywhere. He attains to the Brahman conception. So then he sees all these different identities, due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere. Then he understands the Brahman conception. And those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, or Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. And here he's saying the soul is not entangled also. So we're preaching that entanglement all the time. He's saying that the soul is entangled. All right? So here it says, all bodies must one day cease to exist. Therefore, when we see many different individuals, we should stop seeing them as their field of activity, the Kshetragya. Both the soul and the true soul have nothing to do with matter. That is Brahman vision. So what does a person with Brahman vision see? So those with the vision of eternity see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, beyond the modes of nature, and despite contact with material nature, or Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. So Krishna states clearly that only the body changes. The soul is eternal and changeless. As the soul nevertheless within the body, does he combine with it? So then the sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahman vision does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. So, the entanglement in material nature is an illusory situation. It's not real. So, because it's saying here, Krishna is saying here, that the soul is situated, does not mix with the body. He doesn't do anything, nor is he even entangled. Then, O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one with the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So that consciousness is the nature of the existence of the spirit soul. Because when there's no consciousness, it means that the spirit soul has left. And it says here Krishna offers a second example to explain the point he just made in text 33. He gives a one-verse chapter summary. And so one would eliminate the entire body by consciousness. So that we talked about nature, the enjoyer, and then consciousness. So consciousness is the spirit, the quality of the spirit soul. So those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body, they know of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation of bondage in material nature, attain to the supreme goal. And here it is saying, as suggested by the chapter title, Nature, the Enjoying Consciousness, this chapter describes material nature, the supersoul, and the living entity. Srila Prabhupada sums up the chapter's main points in his purport. The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body, the owner of the body, and the supersoul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12. Then one can go to the supreme destination. One can understand that this body is matter. It can be analyzed with its 24 elements. The body is a gross manifestation, and the subtle manifestation is the mind and psychological effects. And the symptoms of life are the interaction of these features. So there's a gross body, there's a subtle body, but still that's the body. But then over and above this, there's the soul, and there's also the super soul. The soul and the super soul are two. So sometimes the Mayavad thinks that there's only one, and they think that we are all super soul, which is not actually true. And the material world is working by the conjunction of the soul and the 24 elements. One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of soul and material elements, and can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul, becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. And these things are meant for contemplation and for realization. And one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. So, basically, this is a breakdown of the knowledge, the field, the know of the field, knowledge and the object of knowledge, and then Prakriti, which is nature, and Purusha, who is the enjoyer. So, choosing to talk, we understand that the soul doesn't really enjoy, or he doesn't even suffer. He's not entangled at all. But because of the attachment, he thinks he does. So, I think we can stop here tonight. And did you have any questions on that last, in the summing up of those verses?
No problem. It's just a reflection of earlier verses.
Right. Okay, so that's the chapter, nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. All right. It's a pretty clear idea of, who we are in this world, what we are doing here, and how we are doing it. All right, so we can stop here tonight. And how are you feeling today?